Welcome, friends and fellow heathens, to the Northwoods Kindred Podcast. I'm Bodvarr, the chieftain and Gothi of the Northwoods. Today I have an interesting topic, and it was brought to me by a conversation on my Discord server. Now, I'm not going to drop any names here because I didn't get any permission from anyone to use the information, but the topic, it's not the first time that it had come up, and it's a very interesting topic to share, and this is a really good platform to do that. So it's really about charging or paying for goods and services in the Asatru community or Norse pagan community. And there seems to be a little bit of a mixed bag about people who think that you should either never have to pay for services or should always have to pay for services. But I want to kind of go through go down the numbers and look at some good, some bad, and some ugly, and then just basically start the conversation, because these are the kinds of conversations that we should be having as a community. Not the same old boring, tired conversations. Let's start pushing our community forward into the future. So the basic nuts and bolts of the issue is, if clergy require some fee or have a fee structure to perform something like a wedding or a baptismal or anything, do we look at that in the pagan or the heathen community as a derogatory thing? Because we pay for services all the time. Of course we pay for goods. Everybody would rather go to a heathen craftsperson to have something made, especially if it's ritually centric. Of course everybody wants to feed the community that way. But is it the same when you're paying for a service like a wedding or a baptismal from a Asatru Gothi or another heathen? And so, like I said, it is important that we have this conversation. These are the kind of things that move the conversations in the community forward. So we're not rehashing all the old crap about this author is this and that author is that and this organization against that organization and these people against those people. We should really start having more conversations like this, ones that actually build us a foundation. So before we get too heavy into it, I want to say welcome here and join the community. Subscribe to this. If you're listening to the podcast, subscribe to wherever you're getting it at. Right now it would be somewhere around Spotify, but I have other ones in the works. I'm really close to starting to get pushed out to other podcasting platforms that some people may or may not be using. Also, there's a version of this podcast on YouTube. Yes, it's on YouTube, and you can see my smiling face. And there's not really a lot of other heavy graphics. I try to keep the podcast itself not graphic centric so that you can enjoy it in either platform wherever you find yourself. And for now, that's the only places where we're at, but I'm working on getting some more. So absolutely subscribe to one of those. Leave comments, leave me notes. Be a part of the conversation. Let's help drive this public conversation to where we want it to go, instead of letting it just kind of drift in the wind. So if you're new here and you don't actually know what a Gothi is essentially just a clerical leader, a pastor or a minister, someone that performs essentially that basic job for people in the Norse pagan or Asatru community. And Gothi training has always been sort of a kind of one of those things that's up in the air. Most larger national organizations have some sort of ordainment process and Gothi training. And of course, I'm putting the one together here on YouTube, which you may or may not be a part of, listening to the training and doing the exercises. So if you're not, maybe check that out. But the basic Gothi is it's a role of service to your kindred, service to your community, just as you would expect from a good pastor. And I think it translates almost directly to God-man. But then we have Gidya, which I don't think is a traditional word. I think it's something a little bit more modern. But we have the Gidya is our female counterpart to the Gothi. And essentially that's all we are, is the spiritual leader, spiritual advisor. We design rituals, we perform rituals. Most any ritual that any pastor or anything can provide, we can provide as well, which would be your weddings, your funerals, or your hand fastings. Your baptismals are also vatni, your naming or namanfasti. We can perform all of these different services. The Gothis, not everybody who calls himself a Gothi is capable of doing those sort of things, but they should be at least working towards that end. That would be the idea. But the truth is, there's no one organization or group in the United States or anywhere in the world that I'm aware of that can say who can and can't use the title of Gothi or be a Gothi or do Gothi stuff. I think we put a little bit too much power into that title. Let's don't do that so much either. It's not like the old days where you had to go to some sort of a seminal and learn for 4 years before you could become ordained. But we don't have anything like that in the Norse pagan community. So in the absence of anything else, we have a few scholars. We have a few people who have grown up and in the community and have learned a few things and are willing to teach it. And there's just a point where you cross the line where you're not a practitioner anymore, where the majority of your work is educating others and leading others through ritual. That's when you could absolutely wear the Gothi badge with pride. So that's really the basics of what a Gothi or a Gidya is, and in the community, how it relates to the rest of the community, what our essential role is. Now, in Norse society, it was a little different. Of course, the Gothi ship, or the godard, it was called, was a thing. It was a privilege. It was you could purchase it, you could will it, you could inherit it. There's a lot of circumstances where that happened, but there was no special connection that had to be made, or even special training. For the most part, you learned how to do the job on the job. Very much like it is right now. We don't have a lot of written sources. You have to be able to read between the lines. You have to be able to decide what people need and then try to make it as authentic as possible, and incorporate portions into your rituals that mean something, that have a reason. They're not just for pomp and circumstance. And all of that is very similar, I think, to the way that it was. Of course, we don't know how they did their rituals, but we know that the job of the Gothi was to perform those rituals, and we know that there was no special requirements to get that job other than the privilege of being able to afford it. And that came with some other benefits as well. Like I believe in a lot of temples, there was a tax levied against the people for the maintenance of the temple, for upkeep, that sort of a thing. And half of that money went to the Gothi of the temple, or sometimes to the chieftain or the jarl. Sometimes it was a little bit of a mix-up about where the money went, but half of it didn't go to the temple. Half of it went to somebody. And that would be a just compensation in those days, but that would be the privilege of having the Gothership, because of that money is coming in from the people. Well, that's not really a thing anymore. It's not like we're taxing counties or townships or anything. So those that fill the role of the Gothi for their kinsmen are most likely doing it out of pocket. So it's a rise of Norse paganism in modern times, with the kind of like the reinventing of the entire pagan community. It's really kind of going through a morphing phase anyway. But there's been a reach for of people that I've seen trying to create their new kindreds and steads and sippas and covens. People just coming together under whichever banner they choose to celebrate their, pagan and heathen ancestry and practice. In that, people are looking for leaders. They're looking for people who can inspire and teach and actually perform some of these necessary life lessons and life rituals. So that's where the Gothi comes in, and that's really, I'm not trying to toot the Gothi's horn. Every person is different. Anyone that wears that title, that's up to the individual person to work with them and then decide whether or not this person holding the title of Gothi is the person who can give you what you need from the thing. So rather than saying we have good Gothis and bad Gothis, we have Gothis that can give you what you're looking for, and Gothis that can't yet. But hopefully they're working on it. So without going too far down that road, because we have a whole Gothi training thing that's going on that would be a big part of, I just wanted to kind of let you know really that's the center of this conversation, is about the Gothis and whether or not they should charge for some of the services that they provide. So let's get into that. Now, as we go down into these, I have some goods and some bads and some uglies on this. And if your blood starts getting hot, if you're boiling up a little bit and you got something to say, put it down in the comments, because I'm not trying to rewrite the pagan community here. We're just going to have a conversation about some things that are on the minds of people in our community. I'm not trying to change anything, and I'm not trying to claim any authority over how any of this stuff is implemented. I'm only providing my opinion on the topics that are circulating right now, and you can take that or disregard it. It makes no difference to me. Now we're going to talk about whether or not a godi or gidya or other ministerial service person in the pagan faiths should be charging. Now, before we can get into talking about whether or not they should charge or the pros and cons of that, we should talk about, is there any other ways that those that are performing these services could get money or could be supported or could be, repaid for the effort and the time that they put into it. So here's maybe some alternative sources of income that could help the budding godi or the old godi or whatever make ends meet so that he could provide services to the community without having to charge. There's always the possibility of doing community fundraisers. One famous, very popular community fundraiser, which most people have nowadays, is a Patreon. If you're making a product and you're providing some sort of service to people, they can join Patreon and they can give you back a little bit and maybe get a couple of more privileges in the process. But the point is that there's a method there that people can give to you and help support your efforts if that's something that some people might or might not want to do. That's sort of a crowdfunding thing. But it's we have a Patreon, of course, and you can find it on our link tree or whatever if you want to help us out. That's not always a sustainable model, and it is a lot of work to add tiers and to put that effort into those tiers and to make sure you're providing your patrons with what you said you would provide them with. So that's always a struggle with us. We try to not promise too much, and we really try to over deliver, and that's the way I think it should go. But that's if you're getting funded by the community, which is a model that we're just now learning how to do, or just now leaning into, because as we do this podcast and the YouTube and all the other stuff, we do tend to rack up fees in every corner of the internet for servicing and hosting and insight and analytic applications and all those kind of things. So they do add up after a while, as well as just the basic time and energy that goes into all of this. And so we've done that. So that's one source that any other godi or anyone else could do if they have a community to reach out to. Not every small kindred has a community they can reach out to, which makes community fundraising projects near impossible unless you have some other sort of connections going on. We have crowdfunding outside of just the community projects, because you can do a campaign if there happens to be something that needs to get done, like, hey, I have to go to Biloxi, Mississippi to perform a funeral for this person. I would like to crowdfund this thing so it doesn't cost anybody anything. If you'd like to help the pagan community, then you can do some things like that. That was not a pitch. I'm not doing that. I'm just saying that, like, in an event where you want to go help somebody and there not be a charge, you could do a small fundraiser with a goal that could get you there and back to do the thing. So that's always a possibility too. And then that gives you the ability, as the traveling godi, to tap into not only your communities, but their communities, because they're going to want you to come and do that as well. You may actually end up getting in the doorway or a foothold on a whole nother community or a whole nother set of potential friends, mentors, patrons, and all other sorts of online friendships that we have. And then another thing, which is, again, it's sort of dependent on having some kind of a community. We do okay with the community here. We're starting to build a nice, strong heathen community that's mutually supportive and celebrates each other's victories. We don't try to drag each other down. So we're building a nice community around the Northwoods Kindred's online presence, and it's a lot of fun. So if you have a community that you can tap into, another thing that you can do is like merchandise sales, like swag, things like that, like our American Gothi shirts, and on the back it says the world needs more Gothis. So the idea with this is that I'm an American Gothi, but if my friends in Norway want one, I'll put Norwegian Gothi, and then the back will always say the world needs more Gothis, and then we have a Gidya copy of it too. So the point, again, isn't to pitch this to you, but it's to tell you that there are options out there if you have a community. But if you don't have a community, if you're just a small town Gothi, and well, I'm a small town Gothi, but if you don't have some sort of an outreach thing going on and you don't have a community, then the chances of being able to fund these types of events is a little bit harder. It's going to take a little bit more imagination. Or is it okay to just ask them to pay or give a recommended donation? Is that something that we can do as pagan clergy? You tell me down in the comments. Let me know. Would you do that? Is there circumstances where you would and where you wouldn't? Because I'm going to tell you some of mine coming up here real quick. So the last sort of a way that I can think of where clergy could make a little bit of, funding online to help, or funding to help their outreach or help with whatever, programs and stuff they want to contribute to. One other way is the online downloads. Now, we started out here with a few really good free downloads, and they're still free, and they'll always be free. And, one is an outline structure for a bloat that pretty much anyone can do anywhere with very little equipment. I have one on the gods and goddesses, one on some basic questions that people tend to ask when you're new to Asatru, so that you could have a little bit of ammo in your hand and say, yeah, these are the answers to your questions. So those 3 are out there for free. And then we started with the Gothi school in order to sort of just support it and pay for the other things that I need, like potentially even trying out things that are available online so that you don't have to, and then give you a full report. In order to support those kind of things, I've made digital flyer handouts that will essentially just stop people from having to take notes. So they're pretty detailed notes. They were my notes when I shot the video with a little bit more detail in them, and they're available for download for $1.50 or whatever. And I think I have a runic worksheet, which is just basically a piece of paper so you can write down your own interpretations of the runes. Those kind of things that are on there for a couple of bucks for a download, because they're what will ultimately keep the school afloat or keep the training afloat and make it beneficial for both you and me to continue to put forth these videos and help people learn as they go. So we still have those digital projects there too, so don't be afraid to bounce over to any of the links that we put below and check that stuff out. So now let's kind of walk down the road of what are some of the cons? What are some of the bad parts about charging for heathen services? And we're talking across the spectrum here. It could be anything from a counseling to a guide for Anutaseta, or just a trainer or a confidant or a study partner, or in some cases actual performance of bloats and other rituals, and then special sections like Alsavatni, Namanfasti, weddings, funerals, or hand fasting. There's so many occasions where we might want to need clergy folk to mark these ceremonies of our lives. And some people would have to charge for that. So let's talk about that. One is, I'm not sure, I put it in as a con, but I'm not really sure how to articulate it, but we're talking about questioning the authenticity or the credentials of said Gothi. So I don't know if it's a con or not, but I know that if someone was to give a fee structure for a particular ritual, you would expect that they would know how to do it. So you got to understand, some people who say they're a Gothi may have never done this sort of operation before and are just trying to put the pieces together. Everything is better if everybody's above board and communicates well about it. So don't be afraid to ask someone who's a Gothi or wears the title or Gidya and wants to perform certain rituals for you, free of charge or otherwise. It is okay to ask, like, what are your credentials? How long have you been doing this? Have you done this? Have you done this before? It's perfectly okay to ask those sort of things. So vet them first and foremost. One thing that I see as a negative is that when too many things are for profit, then that part of the organization or the outreach tends to take charge, and everything seems to be done. If everything is for profit, then profit is the ultimate motivator, and sometimes that can open the door for some pretty nefarious activity. And certainly in the pagan community, and recently on TikTok, we've seen some pretty unethical practices and by some pretty unethical people. And we'll continue to see that sort of a thing as long as there's money to be made in it. So I would think that just the whole fact of there being something that resembles a profit industry or a for-profit industry certainly does open the door for a lot of unethical behavior and a lot of people to try to slip in under the cracks and make a quick buck. So that's definitely a con, and I think that it should also really illustrate the point that you should vet your spiritual advisors. So I guess the last major con that I can think of, if you got another one, absolutely throw it in the comments. I'll read it and I'll comment and we'll have a little conversation. And if we really need time, we'll take it over to Discord and we'll have a real conversation. But absolutely, if you got some ideas that I missed, put them down there. The last real con is that if too many people charge or everybody charges, that there'll be less need for that service. And that's not always a bad thing. So we don't want to invite those people into our community. So if we do open it up and have this conversation for the larger Asatru community, then it's maybe something that we should discuss is how we can identify and rid the people who are in it just for the profit, who don't know the gods and they don't know the practice and they don't know the people. They just swoop in and take their cash and swoop back out. Let's talk about some pros. If there's compensation for the time and the effort and the work that goes into designing these rituals for people, then people will be more apt, people meaning godis, both new and old, will be more apt to participate or to want to help if there's some compensation that goes into these sort of things. And I'll tell you, for one, like myself, I'm listed in a friend's will to perform his services when he passes, and he also wrote it into the will that my fees will be covered, whatever those happen to be, through his estate. Now, of course, we know if I'm going to perform a funeral for my friend, it'd be really great to have the plane and the maybe cheap hotel room paid for. That would be fantastic. But I would never charge anything above expenses to perform a funeral for a friend or a kinsman, ever. But I understand that that's not the case for a lot of people. Some people can charge, and that's fine, and I don't begrudge them for that. But for any Gothi services, while I am in favor of a fee structure, I am in favor of some kind of a fee setup, because doing a wedding or performing a wedding or an asopad, these things are not without effort and research. And even if the Gothi knows how to do it already and has done it a dozen times before, they're still going to probably do a little refresher research, but that information didn't come to them free. That information, that the knowing how to do that, is because they put in the time and the effort to scour the resources and find the bits and pieces that they could plaster together and make it resemble something from the old ways. That should be not only recognized, but compensated in certain circumstances. Now, another pro is that an experienced Gothi will make fabulous memories, whereas a inexperienced Gothi won't, or may be able to make a fantastic memory, but in the case of a wedding, you're essentially basing you're gambling a wedding on someone who doesn't exactly know what they're doing. And the point is not to denigrate anybody, but to say that if there is if it's something that we accept, that you can hire out a Gothi for this or that, if it's something that we accept and we embrace, that really opens the door for people to be skilled in those crafts and in those trades, because in addition to learning it for themselves and for their kindreds, providing services to the public, there's some sort of thing that says, if I do this well, then I can help people, and it's not going to cost me anything extra to do it. Because a lot of times, the thing that stops an experienced Gothi from being able to perform these rituals is the financial burden of having to absorb the cost. So let's just say, for instance, Karen and Ken want to get married, and they decided that they want to have a Viking wedding. So they come to the Gothi and they talk about, what are the pieces of the wedding that you want? Is this a hand fasting? Do you want the full gauntlet? Do you want the family involved? Do we want to reenact some more ancient scenarios, for the festivities of leading up to the wedding, and sort of stage it to work like an old one? See, some older Gothis would know how to do that, where younger Gothis might not. And the willingness of the community to accept that will allow there to be more experienced Gothis available, and Maybe even like a pagan Yelp. It's like, oh yeah, this guy did it great. Oh, this guy was a mess and he got drunk and he passed out and threw up in the cake. Like because they're out there, man. They're out there. They are. And then another one, which I think is the most important point, and really all of this was kind of leading up to it, was a point in favor of charging for some ceremonies and rituals and godi type work. Now, we'll get into events here in just a second, but this is my last major point on charging for actual rituals, like a baptism or a wedding or a funeral or anything. You will get, if we're not charging a base price, we will get religious tourism. So you'll get, Karen and Ken that don't necessarily care much about religion, but they're in love and they want to get married and they want to get it done cheap. So if you're not charging, it's like, yeah, we can have a Viking wedding experience and it's free. So don't be flattered by people who want you to marry them just because you're ordained and you know how. Don't be flattered by that. Expect to be compensated for a marriage, a wedding, because anybody else is going to, if they go to a justice of the peace, if they go to the local Baptist minister, if they go to the local Catholic, anything, they're going to pay for it. And it's not a small amount. I mean, I got married 30 years ago in a dinky little church in Michigan, and I think we were in it for $2,000 by the time we got the minister and the church hall and everything, not including the after wedding dinner thing. That's not cheap, but I would probably, if you were going to perform a ceremony somewhere, I would probably call some of the local corner churches and just ask, how much is it to have a ceremony performed by your priest? What if we do it in your church, or versus having you come someplace else, like in a public park or something like that? So kind of bounce around, make a couple of phone calls and get the pricings that they're using, and then base what you're going to charge on that for the region, because then you can get a good compensation for the work that you're doing, because it's no less important and no less valuable or viable than the work that Catholic priest or those other ministers or anybody else would do. If you're ordained, you know the laws, you've done your research, you provide them with this dream wedding that covers, their religion, and it's not a bunch of manufactured Christian stuff, then you deserve to be compensated for that hard work. That's more than can be expected to be a gift, especially for people you don't even know. So if I can just hammer one thing home, don't be flattered by people who want you to do it. Get to the root of the problem, because they may just be religious tourists or somebody looking for a free way through. So some of those events should be done. However, big caveat, if one of my kinsmen was getting married, there would be no charge ever. I wouldn't even entertain the thought. Not at all. And if my kinsman had a child and needed ossolotany or needed a runic healing or anything that my kinsman needed is there. I'm there for my kinsman. But when we go beyond our walls, with people we don't really know, to perform particular services because they have a need, then, it's obviously up to us to make sure that that's a real need and that it's not just religious tourism. Then again, to find out if this is a service that we want to provide, and then do our research to figure out how much that service should cost. I do believe that it should be paid for, especially in the case of a wedding. It's a momentous occasion in people's lives. They want it done right, and if you want it done right, you got to pay for the right people to do it. And the people who do it or are willing to do it should be compensated for the work and the effort that they put into it. So then, I guess the only other thing would be, or topic of discussion that was at least touched on in the previous conversation on my Discord, was they were talking about paid events, and there was a little bit of friction between paying for an event and not. So let's break that down a little bit as well. First, most of these large events are held on some sort of a public space or a space that needs to be paid for. So that right there is going to factor into the initial cost of any of these events. Is going to be, how many people can we get in here, how much space do we have to house these people or to keep these people if it's an overnight one, like a camping trip or something. And then how much is it going to cost? So you take that cost and immediately out the gate, if you can hold 80 people on this property and it costs such and such money, that money is immediately divided up over the potential for about a 60% fill up. And that's how you have to disperse that money or disperse that cost. So those would absolutely, I mean, that's alone. That's not even talking about food and any other fees like porta-johns and things that you have to rent. So those events, I don't think anybody can argue should be paid for. Now, in some cases, I guess I would have mixed feelings about, say, someone who was doing a runic study at the local pub and was charging $20 a head for people to come down and listen to him spew some knowledge about runes. I think that would be taking advantage of a thirst that the public has. Like that, if there was enough people to show up and pay $20, then there's a thirst there, and I think that that's kind of taking advantage of it. But you are free to disagree with me. I know I wouldn't do that. I would feel weird about it, but I don't see it as something wrong. So I'm really kind of on the fence on something like that. I would feel very weird about it, even though my whole 30 years of my life has been in studying not only the runes, but the religion and the ritual of it as well. So to me, I would feel very weird. If I want to sit down and have a conversation with people, I would. I don't charge people to have a conversation with me. I never have. I never will. That's just strange. But there are other people, maybe not in our community, that lecture on a lecture circuit and make tens of thousands of dollars for a single lecture on a topic that they're intimately familiar with and their voice is respected. So why shouldn't people be able to do that when they know something about seed that or a galded or a rune work or ritual? Why shouldn't they be able to be compensated like any other lecturer or TEDx talk? So that's a conversation to have, I think. And then I think where the heartburn was in this previous conversation was about charging for gatherings at a kindred level or at a smaller level, like just people getting together and charging for it. Like, hey, you can come to the next gathering, but the gathering fee's $50, and show up on time or be left out. Because that would be a little weird. But we managed to keep a nice situation here where we spread the weight we spread the burden around really well, so nobody really has to absorb it. But some kindreds can't do that, and some people aren't maybe necessarily stable enough, financially to be able to help support that. In that case, if you're Gothi, maybe they lost a job, maybe they're disabled, maybe they just don't have a lot of money, but they know how to do this kind of stuff, to gather at their place continuously is a financial stress on their household. So in that case, if they determine that they would need to be, they would need to charge a fee for that entry, then I can see that. Now, of course, we don't do that here. We're in a fortunate situation where everybody is gainfully employed, upright, and for the most part, mentally and physically stable. So everybody has a good living, and that's nice because it's just one less stress we have to worry about. But not all kindreds are like that, and it's not unreasonable to think that if it is becoming a financial burden, that your kinsmen should kick in and help with that. Now we have had pay-to-play gatherings here as well, but they've been very specifically craft gatherings. And I'll give a good example is that Skogel and I went to a local, we have some local like folk schools around here, so we went and they put on workshops all the time. I went to learn how to make yurts and all kinds of stuff. But we went to a workshop where we learned how to make pack baskets, and you've probably seen mine in a lot of videos. I've almost always got it with me. So we learned to do that in an actual workshop, and it cost $200 or $300 a piece to do that. So we thought, wow, this is such great fun, and we really enjoy the craft, and the product is so amazing. We're going to teach it to our kinsmen. So we went through all the ordering processes that they gave us in the class, and we calculated how much we would need to do all this stuff for our kinsmen, and we said, okay, anybody that wants to come out and make a pack basket, the cost will be $50, and we're going to order all the supplies and have everything here, so roger up if you want to show up, bring your $50, and then we will build a pack basket. So essentially what we did for our kinsmen was we went out and we paid for it, and we paid dearly for it, And then we came back and for the cost of materials, they now have the pack basket and they know how to do it in the future, or to just repair it if it gets damaged. So that's beneficial, but it wasn't a profit-making thing. We didn't try to profit off of our own people. So I don't know where that line is drawn, but I guess whereas we didn't pay for all of the materials for everybody to craft a basket, we also don't pay for all the food. So if there's in a situation where somebody was paying for all the food, I can understand where they would want to charge for the plate as well. And some of our gatherings could probably be mixed up like they do for some of the larger survival gatherings, where you got different fee structures where you have a fee if you're coming to eat, or you want food. Or in our case, I always, whenever I go to anything, if I'm not teaching there, then I'll buy the no food option, because the food is the largest portion of the cost, and I love cooking for myself. So when we're camping or doing anything like that, I'm always happy to bring a few coolers full of food and eat like a king. Way better and for cheaper generally than the food option. So that option can be made available to people as well. It doesn't necessarily work at the kindred level for a gathering, but it will work at a local level for 2 or 3 kindreds to get together and have a moot, or even a larger or regional lovers. Then those kind of a model will work out really well, I think. So I don't think that that's the common. I don't think most kindreds charge people to show up. But I do think that there are circumstances where that is necessary, plausible, okay, and also nefarious. So every single thing needs to be looked at, I think, individually, and look at the cost versus gain and the burden on the host, and those sort of things to be taken, to take a good, strong look at. Because in a lot of cases, what we do in the community is we get a simple fact, and we take that fact and we blow it up because we fill in all the blanks without ever actually asking for any kind of clarification. So we could be like, oh, that dude charged $100 for a baptism, for an Asavatni on that poor family. Like, he should have just done that for free. And it's like, yeah, but it was $100, but he had to drive 3 hours to get there, and then he had to sleep in his car at a rest stop. Like, you got to take all the extra information into account as well before we start passing judgment on our fellow heathens, for sure. So this has been a pretty fun conversation, and it all spawned from a conversation that was being had on my Discord. And again, I would like to mention the names, but I didn't ask for permission, so I'm not going to do that, because we value everybody's consent here at the Northwoods, and that is part of that same thing. But if he comes on and he wants to drop his name or a link or something down in the comments, that's perfectly okay if YouTube allows links. I don't even know how that works anymore. But I hope that you got something good out of this, and that you decide to stick around for a while and maybe subscribe to this podcast. And there's links down below. You're welcome to jump on those links, bounce back to my website, get some of the free downloads, get some of the paid downloads. I got a couple on there for $1.50, and you'll get some good information there as well. And I want to ask you to come back here to YouTube specifically and join our Gothi training, because every Sunday we're putting out a video, and it's going to have some information just for the new Gothi who's trying to learn how to do the job on the fly, trying to learn as you Gothi. So I'm just here to kind of mentor you in whatever way that I can to help you become the best Gothi for your kinsmen that you can be. And at the same time, in order to offset some of that cost, I put together some handouts to go with some of this training that is there for a tip and a download. That's about all I have for you today. I hope to see you back here next week, and possibly even Wednesday. I'll be live here discussing some of the topics that we brought up in the last Gothi training video. So that's the idea with the Gothi training, is that we'll pop a video out on Sunday, we'll come live and talk about it on Wednesday, on Odin's days, when we'll start spreading some knowledge there. We'll do it live. We'll do it a half hour, 45 minutes, maybe an hour. We'll see what we get out of it. It'll be at 5 o'clock California time. I hope to see you there, friends and fellow heathens. Till next time, þórr viki, my friends.